You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Judge explodes over tampered evidence in disastrous Trump-linked trial, based on an article by Sarah K. Burris. Pirro's case looks less like law than a cover story. A prosecutor with power, not a victim of the problem. Jeanine Pirro is not a passive observer in this story. She's the U.S. attorney driving a case against David Hearn over alleged damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. The reporting suggests the government's own witness undercut the central accusation by saying the damage was already there before Hearn arrived. That is not a minor inconsistency. It is the state losing control of its own evidence and, with it, its claim to moral authority. The real question is who set the trap. The important fact is not that a defendant may have a strong defense. It is that federal prosecutors appear to have built a case on unstable ground and then used the machinery of the state to force it forward anyway. If the witness testimony and grand jury chronology are as described, then the issue is not confusion. It is prosecutorial overreach backed by institutional force. Hearn faces the weight of the DOJ. The DOJ faces embarrassment, disclosure demands, and the possibility that its own process exposed the weakness of the accusation. Evidence, missing documents, and the government's peril. The source points to a deeper problem. The defense may now gain access to repaired documents, missing documentation, contractor records, and grand jury material that could show how this case was assembled. That is not just bad luck for prosecutors. It's a justice system more interested in generating a felony headline than preserving a coherent factual record. The judge's warning matters here. If workers examining fixes and tearing up the liner were tampering with evidence, then the government was not merely careless. It was actively endangering the integrity of the case it was trying to make. The judge's line that the government does so at its own peril reads like an indictment of prosecutorial arrogance. The pattern is familiar. This is the same architecture of abuse that keeps showing up in political cases: selective enforcement, inflated certainty, and a legal process that treats the state's theory as more credible than the facts. The comparison to the Broadview ICE case sharpens the point. There, prosecutors allegedly fed grand jurors conflicting and unfactual information, described defendants as guilty before any trial, and excused anyone who seemed hesitant. That is not neutral law enforcement. It is institutional coercion dressed up as procedure. ICE belongs in the category of agencies that should not be patched up with reform language after repeated abuse. The logic of detention, intimidation, and politically convenient targeting is the problem. Abolish ICE. The broader pattern here is the same one. A carceral state that mistakes intimidation for legitimacy and then acts surprised when the record collapses under scrutiny. Pirro's real mistake. The commentary quoted in the source calls Pirro stupid. The sharper point is that stupidity is not the main issue. The main issue is power used sloppily enough to leave fingerprints. If the government's witness, grand jury process, and evidence handling all point in different directions, then the case is not a clean pursuit of justice. It is a political prosecution with paperwork problems. That is how authoritarian habits often look in practice, not as grand declarations, but as careless, self-protective institutions trying to punish an enemy before they have finished checking their own facts. What the story actually shows: the state does not need perfect competence to do damage. It only needs enough power to force the rest of the public to treat its accusations as presumptively serious. When that power is aimed at protesters, dissidents, or convenient targets, sloppy prosecution becomes political discipline. The scandal is not just that Pirro may have overreached. The scandal is that the system made overreach feel normal until the witnesses and documents started to pull the mask off. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article, with the automated voice of Kiesel. Thanks for listening.